really know who he was. And then I started seeing other things because he had a violent side to him too that I didn't know about. He was sickly for a good bit as well. Some people say he died of heart complications, and he was a millionaire twice. How you get to be a millionaire and you're broke? And now his legacy is worth $12 million. So if not more.
Remember Fred Berry? His demise is much sadder than we thought. He made America laugh as Rerun on What's Happening. But behind the jokes were years of turmoil. Berry battled addiction, multiple divorces, and severe diabetes that nearly took his legs.
Because that was like, God, I need to get up out of here, but I'm a faithful wife. How do I walk? I didn't even have to walk. He couldn't cover his lies.
His career collapsed after public disputes, financial ruin, and lawsuits over unpaid debts. Once earning thousands per episode, he died broke and isolated.
And we in the back of the line. When he had that beret on, people knew who he was. But when he got older, people quite didn't know if he didn't have a beret on, unless you really look at him.
From fame to foreclosure, Fred Berry's life revealed how quickly Hollywood can turn applause into agony. Before the scandals, before the heartbreak, Fred Berry was the life of every room he walked into. Born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1951 and raised in the tough streets of South Central Los Angeles, Berry turned pain into rhythm. He grew up poor, dreaming of escaping the chaos that surrounded him. Dance became his language, and by his teenage years, he was already making a name in underground clubs as the hip-hop dancer. Berry's big break came when he joined the Lockers, a pioneering street dance crew that brought hip-hop and funk moves to national television. Alongside legends like Tony Basil and Don Campbell Campbell, Fred Berry's moves were unmatched. His energy, charisma, and unique look of red beret, suspenders, wide grin made him stand out. He became one of the first black dancers to break through to mainstream TV audiences in the 1970s.
Early in his 20s, Berry was a member of the Los Angeles-based dance troupe The Lockers.
But what really made Fred Berry a household name was his role in the hit sitcom What's Happening, which premiered in 1976. As Rerun, Berry stole the show. His infectious laughter, slick dance moves, and lovable energy made him a fan favorite.
Meet your new American friend. Give me 500.
He wasn't just a supporting character, he was the show's heartbeat. Within months, Berry went from a dancer struggling to pay rent to one of the most recognizable faces on television.
If you grew up in the 70s or 80s, you probably knew of Rerun, the big guy famous for his pop and lock dance moves and breakout performances on the sitcom What's Happening and its sequel, What's Happening Now. Behind the scenes, Fred Berry was fighting personal demons.
Success brought luxury. He bought cars, clothes, and a big home in Los Angeles. He was making thousands per episode, partying with celebrities, and living like a star. But behind the bright lights, trouble was brewing. Fame came fast, and Fred wasn't prepared for what followed.
You know what I'm saying? And he was a millionaire twice.
He started missing rehearsals, arguing with producers, and demanding more pay. Cast members described him as difficult and unreliable. The once humble dancer was now caught in the fame trap of ego, pressure, and excess. By the late 1970s, tensions between Berry and the show's producers reached a boiling point. His addiction to drugs and alcohol was growing, and the network had had enough. In 1979, What's Happening was canceled, and with it, Fred Berry's career began to spiral. He had become famous overnight, but he would soon learn how unforgiving Hollywood could be once the cameras stopped rolling. When What's Happening ended, Fred Berry's fame turned from blessing to burden.
Fred continued to act in various television shows and films. However, for whatever reason, the offers weren't plentiful for him.
He tried to capitalize on his success, but struggled to separate himself from Rerun.
During the same CNN interview, Fred said, "I'm still called Rerun and I love it."
Everywhere he went, fans wanted the same dance, the same jokes, the same smile. But behind that smile, Fred was losing control. Berry began indulging heavily in and alcohol.
Fred's personal life was plagued with tons of issues, including struggles with drugs and alcohol, which ultimately led to an arrest for cocaine possession.
He was spending money recklessly, hanging out with people who fed his ego but drained his pockets. His sudden wealth gave him access to everything he'd ever wanted, like cars, parties, women, luxury clothes, but also everything he didn't need. The more he partied, the more distant he became from his family and friends. At one point, Barry claimed to be earning over $15,000 per week, yet within a few years, he was nearly broke. His addiction grew as fast as his expenses. He spent recklessly, often covering bills for entire clubs or giving handouts to people who saw him as a paycheck. Lawsuits over unpaid debts, alimony, and tax problems piled up. He was evicted from homes and forced to sell personal belongings from his wardrobe to memorabilia just to survive. Barry's financial and emotional collapse mirrored his professional struggles. When producers launched What's Happening Now in 1985, Barry saw it as a chance for redemption. It was marketed as a revival for the beloved cast, a second shot at stardom. But the Fred Barry who showed up on set was no longer the same man who once lit up the stage. Reports from cast and crew said he was difficult to work with, demanding higher pay, showing up late, and refusing direction. Some days, he wouldn't come at all. Others, he'd bring his entourage onto the set, causing friction with producers. One insider later said, Fred wanted to be the star of every scene. He forgot it was supposed to be an ensemble. Eventually, producers had enough. After multiple warnings and missed rehearsals, Barry was fired again. This time, the fall was harder. He wasn't just losing a job, he was losing the last major opportunity Hollywood was willing to give him. His addiction and ego left him isolated. Friends tried to intervene, but Barry resisted help. He told one reporter, "I'm Rerun. They can't fire me from being me." But Hollywood had already moved on. By the late 1980s, Barry's face appeared more often on talk shows and tabloids than on television scripts. He became a cautionary tale, the funny man who couldn't escape his own punchline. In one infamous interview, he appeared visibly intoxicated, slurring as he talked about how fame destroyed his discipline. "I thought I was invincible," he said. "I thought people loved me, but they loved the character."
But then the stress of success got to me, the fat jokes got to me, and I got heavily into alcohol.
At the same time, controversy followed. He faced public scrutiny over lawsuits, unpaid contracts, and what the media called erratic behavior. Former business partners accused him of breaching deals. Old friends stopped answering his calls. His multiple marriages and divorces added to the chaos, with court papers showing he owed back payments to former spouses. Barry's personal health also began to decline. Years of substance abuse took a toll on his weight and heart. He gained massive amounts of weight, often joking about it in interviews to deflect from the pain. Behind the jokes, doctors warned him of diabetes, hypertension, and high cholesterol conditions that would later contribute to his demise.
He was sickly for a good bit as well. Some people say he died of heart complications. That's what you say.
But Barry didn't stop performing even when he had nothing left. He started appearing at small clubs, local events, and even reality-style interviews where he talked openly about addiction, faith, and failure. "I'm living proof of what happens when success meets stupidity," he said during one late-night interview. To audiences, he was still the funny, lovable Rerun. To those close to him, he was a man fighting invisible battles against regret, addiction, and his own image. Fred Barry had reached the top of American television and fallen just as hard. The man who made the world laugh was now fighting to keep himself alive, trying to reclaim a sense of identity in a world that only remembered him for who he used to be. By the early 1990s, Fred Barry's once bright career had fallen into turmoil. The man who once made America laugh as Rerun was now trapped in a cycle of addiction and emotional chaos. Friends described him as a man at war with himself. Behind the smile that had charmed millions was a storm of personal demons that fame could no longer hide.
Everything you see on TV is not of silver and gold. It's not what you really would think it was going to be. He was one person behind closed doors.
According to those close to him, Barry's life after What's Happening was marked by unstable relationships and substance abuse. In the Geneva and Essie Barry interview, Essie recalled how and heavy drinking became part of his daily routine. She described moments when Barry would lose control, fall into violent rages, and damage property during emotional outbursts. She shared an incident where he smashed the windows of her car to stop her from leaving, a sign of how deep his anger and fear of abandonment had grown.
Everything you see on TV is not of silver and gold. It's not what you really would think it was going to be. He was one person behind closed doors.
Barry's relationships reflected that same chaos. He was married 6 times, remarrying 2 of his former wives, but none of the unions brought him lasting peace. Essie said several of his former partners shared stories of physical and emotional abuse. In her own words, she admitted she had not known he could be abusive until she saw it for herself. Behind closed doors, the man who had been loved for his joyful dancing on television became controlling and paranoid, terrified of losing those closest to him.
He was one person behind closed doors, but he was another person when I left Georgia.
His addiction and volatile behavior destroyed his career. The same confidence that made him stand out during auditions turned into defiance on set. When he demanded fair pay and equal treatment for Black cast members, he was labeled difficult and written out of What's Happening. Once he lost that platform, Hollywood doors began to close. Casting directors avoided him, fearing his reputation.
But then when Rerun and What's Happening went into syndication and they wanted to do What's Happening Now, Fred wanted more money and they didn't want to give him more money. So they tried to stop him from using his name.
The decline did not stop there. Financially, Barry was struggling. He lost his home, cars, and savings. He had once earned about $5,000 per episode, but by the mid-1990s, he was nearly broke. Essie said he came to Georgia with just $100 in his pocket. He was living off occasional appearances and struggling to rebuild his image, but the industry had moved on. His body began to reflect the damage his lifestyle had caused. Years of alcohol, stress, and overeating led to obesity and diabetes. His health worsened with each relapse, and his once lively movements were replaced by slow, painful steps. Friends noticed the spark fading from his eyes. By the end of the decade, Fred Barry had gone from a symbol of joy to a man haunted by mistakes, addiction, and broken relationships. The audience that once adored Rerun had vanished, leaving behind a man fighting to find himself again in the ruins of fame. In the late 1990s, Fred Barry began searching for redemption. After years of chaos, he turned away from Hollywood and toward faith. He became a minister, determined to help others avoid the mistakes that had destroyed him. He began visiting churches and schools, preaching about recovery and second chances. Those who saw him speak said he was honest, humble, and deeply emotional. For Barry, faith became a stage where he could tell the truth without judgment. He called himself Reverend Rerun, embracing the nickname that once defined his career. Through sermons and interviews, he told audiences about the emptiness of fame and the dangers of addiction. He spoke about losing everything and learning that peace could not come from applause. Though the crowds were smaller and the lights dimmer, Barry's message carried the weight of experience.
He also worked as a motivational speaker and a Baptist minister, inspiring others to overcome their own struggles with addiction and adversity.
Essie Barry, who later remarried him, became his closest ally. She helped him manage his health, his schedule, and his efforts to protect his legacy from exploitation. She described him as a man trying to heal while still battling the consequences of his past. Despite their rocky history, they rebuilt their relationship on forgiveness and mutual support. Together, they worked to reclaim control over his name and likeness. hoping to preserve the positive side of his memory.
It is deceased now, and I can't change what has happened. But if my voice can do something to make someone stronger to know it ain't what it's cut out to be, I'm not gonna hide that truth to make him look good.
But even as Barry found spiritual peace, his body continued to fail. Years of poor health, obesity, and diabetes left him dependent on medication and walking aids. He had undergone gastric bypass surgery to lose weight, dropping more than 100 pounds, but the relief was temporary. According to Essie, the damage was already too deep. Barry experienced a stroke that weakened him permanently, forcing him to slow down and limit his travels. Still, he refused to quit. He continued preaching, warning others about addiction and the cost of chasing fame. His tone grew softer with time, less about regret and more about acceptance. To many, he became a living testimony of resilience. Those who met him in his final years said he was calm, grateful, and eager to help others heal.
He even managed to shed 100 pounds, and for at least a little while, he seemed to have truly turned a corner.
Fred Barry no longer sought fame. What he wanted most was forgiveness and peace. The laughter that once defined him had faded, replaced by reflection. Despite the scars and public ridicule, he managed to find purpose again through faith. By 2003, Fred Barry's health had reached a breaking point. The effects of diabetes, obesity, and a previous stroke had left him frail and exhausted. He lived quietly in his Los Angeles home, away from cameras and crowds. His days were slow and lonely, filled with reflection and prayer. Essie recalled that he had grown more peaceful, but also withdrawn. His strength was fading, and he relied heavily on medication and assistance to move around. Those who saw him near the end said he seemed tired but calm, accepting that his time was short. He still received occasional invitations to speak, but most days he stayed home. On October 21, 2003, Fred Barry was found dead in his Los Angeles residence. He was 52 years old. Authorities confirmed that the cause was complications from a stroke, worsened by diabetes. There was no sign of foul play or substance relapse. It was simply a body worn out from decades of struggle.
Because how he died, I married him October the 22nd, 1999. He died October the 21st, 2003.
The news of his death spread quickly. Friends and fans were shocked. Many had not realized how sick he had been. His passing became a sobering reminder of how far he had fallen from his television glory days. Colleagues remembered him as a gifted comedian and dancer whose energy once filled every room. They spoke of his talent, his charm, and the sadness that shadowed his later life. Essie described the moment she learned of his death as devastating. She found out through the news, like many others, and felt the world had forgotten him too soon. At his funeral, she sat quietly, surrounded by people who came to pay their respects. It was a small, humble ceremony for a man who had once been one of television's brightest faces. Fred Barry's story ended in solitude, but his legacy remained. His portrayal of Rerun broke barriers for Black actors in the 1970s, proving that humor and joy could cross cultural lines. His downfall served as a warning about the cost of fame, but his attempt at redemption offered a lesson in humility.
Fred Rerun Barry, the charismatic performer who rose to fame at a young age, fell hard.
Though his final years were filled with pain, Barry's impact on television and popular culture never disappeared. For those who grew up watching him dance, laugh, and light up the screen, Rerun would always be more than a character. He was a reminder of how even the brightest stars can struggle in silence. Fred Barry died quietly, but his story still speaks loudly about resilience, forgiveness, and the fragile line between success and self-destruction. In October 2003, the laughter finally stopped. Fred Barry, the man millions knew as Rerun, the joyful dancing soul of What's Happening, was found dead at his Los Angeles home on October 21, 2003. He was just 52 years old. The official cause was complications from a stroke, made worse by diabetes and years of declining health. For those who knew him closely, the news was heartbreaking, but not shocking. Barry had been battling physical pain, loneliness, and the ghosts of his past for years. In his final years, Barry often appeared upbeat in public, giving interviews, performing at churches, or talking to young addicts about recovery. But behind closed doors, he was struggling. He had lost touch with most of his former castmates. Financially, he was barely surviving. His once booming laughter now echoed in an empty house. His death was followed by confusion and sadness. At first, false rumors spread. Some claimed it was a heart attack. Others suspected an overdose. But autopsy reports clarified it was natural causes related to his stroke and diabetes. Yet, even after his death, controversy hovered. Tabloids revisited his lawsuits, past addiction, and the scandals that destroyed his image. The same media that once celebrated his dancing now replayed his mistakes.
Something came up with Fred's daughter, Portia, so I asked for the autopsy. When I get the autopsy, it didn't make sense. None of it made sense.
Despite that, Fred Berry's story refused to end in tragedy alone. Fans across generations began to rediscover him. Old episodes of What's Happening resurfaced on TV, and new audiences fell in love with Rerun, the man who could make anyone laugh just by walking into a room. On social media, tributes poured in. "He made us happy," one post read, "even if he wasn't." After Fred Berry's death, his wife, Essie Berry, made it her mission to defend his name and rewrite the story that Hollywood got wrong. She refused to let the world remember him only as a troubled sitcom star. In interviews, she painted a deeper picture of a man who gave when he had nothing, who opened his home to strangers, and who fought his demons with quiet determination. "Fred was human," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "He made mistakes, yes, but his heart was pure. He cared more than people ever realized."
That because I want his legacy to be preserved. I want the story to be told, but I want it to be told truthful.
Essie became his loudest advocate, appearing on talk shows and documentaries to speak the truth about his final years. She revealed how many people had taken advantage of his kindness, how fame had chewed him up and left him to rebuild himself through faith. She wanted people to see the real Fred Berry, the man who prayed daily, mentored young actors, and still believed in forgiveness even after the industry that made him famous turned its back on him. "He wasn't just Rerun," she said. "He was a survivor." Today, Fred Berry stands as both a cultural legend and a cautionary tale. His red beret and suspenders aren't just fashion. They're symbols of an era when black sitcoms broke barriers and laughter brought families together. But his story also exposes Hollywood's darker truth, how quickly it celebrates you, then forgets you the moment the spotlight fades. He embodied joy, rhythm, and comedy. Yet behind the smile was a man desperate to be seen as more than a punchline. Fred Berry's ending was far sadder than most ever knew, not simply because he died too soon, but because he died misunderstood. The world remembered the jokes, not the pain, the fame, but not the faith. Still, his laughter echoes, his dance lives on, and his story reminds us that even broken stars can shine again in the light of truth.